Hey guys, hope everyone's well. It's just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon here in Melbourne, Australia, and it's good to see some guys already in the chat. How is tomorrow doing? Yeah, well, man, nothing's changed. I can tell you that much. Yeah, it is Wednesday here, believe it or not. I know that kind of sounds pretty weird, but it is. Yeah, good to see some familiar names here. Hey, Mark. Hope everyone's doing really cool. Look, man, today I will see. I'm not too sure how long we'll go for, but I do have some stuff to get through. I did an Origin 50 mod. It's kind of the Jose Master mod. It's I think when I first released the YouTube for it, I called it the kind of metal mod, and I kind of done a few of those mods, and one day I had one here, and I actually did a live stream. I don't know, maybe it was 3 weeks ago or something like that, and the guy I did that mod for didn't want an effects loop, so we didn't actually replace the effects loop. So if you're familiar with the Origin mod that we do, you'll know that the tube-driven effects loop that's stock in the Origin gets repurposed into the core circuit, right? So it disables the effects loop. So the only way to get it back is to put in the zero loss LND 150 style loop. Now I will say, if there's any background noise, right, I have to apologise, because it is, as I said, it's the middle of the day here, and there's some council workers like literally outside this window here, and they're reasonably quiet at the moment, but man, just before they had some pretty loud machinery going, so I apologise for that, but we're just going to make do with what we've got. So I've got a camera, let me make sure I've got it turned on here, hang on. I've got a camera set up here on the amp, and let's flick to it. It should be coming through now. There it is. Right, so as we kind of go through this, I'll be able to kind of go through and point out some of the kind of key things associated with wiring in an effects loop in your Origin 50. So the things that we talk about will actually be relevant for this style of mod, which is the pre-tone stack Jose Master, but also for wiring in one of these effects loops in any of the Origin mods that I've published. And there's three, right? There's the kind of the original JCM 800 style one, which kind of turns an Origin 50 or an Origin 20 into a 2204 style circuit. There's the Plexi one. Personally, I don't think an effects loop in a Plexi is useful at all, but you could do it. And obviously this one here, which is the kind of pre-tone stack master Jose. And for the setup, let me just flick back to this again. You can probably see in the background here, I've got my, it's an Eventide H9, right, straight in the loop. So, and I've just got it kind of set on I think it's a space-time algorithm, which gives you reverb and delay in the single algorithm on an H9, and it's creatively called Wet, and I'll just kind of play some tones, right, and then we'll kind of get into the guts of setting up one of these loops. And yeah, as we go, right, if there's any other questions, right, I mean, the content of this stream is kind of about this Origin that's on the bench here, but obviously happy to kind of take any other Q&A on any of the kind of stuff that we're doing here, or any of your Marshall space circuits, hopefully, or other things, but I'll do my best. Anyway, I'm just going to kind of play some of this stuff, and you'll get some basic tones here. This is, you can probably already tell, it's a Pete Thorne signature, sir, and it's completely stock. So it's got the Thornbucker plus in the bridge and the normal Thornbucker in the neck, and I'm on the single coil. So I'm going to demonstrate the kind of variation in tones that you can get just with the guitar volume So this amp is kind of set pretty gainy. All right, you can hear a little bit of slap back delay there and some reverb, but I'm just going to kind of start off with some single coil tones with the volume rolled back, and we'll see where we go from there. All right. I hope that's coming through okay, guys. Someone can drop a comment in the chat and just confirm that that's coming through. That would be that'd be pretty helpful. I just want to say, in the weekend, you probably saw some of the photos and some clips that I posted on social media. We had the Melbourne Guitar Show last weekend, which is the kind of Australian version of NAMM, and I mentioned kind of in the lead up to that, the same but smaller, but a really important and great event for the industry. So I just again want to thank Charles Celia for hosting me on his booth at his stand, right? And if you haven't checked out Charles Celia, I suggest you do so. He's a custom guitar builder. He builds to order, and he has a range of kind of standard models in his lineup. And his guitars, like having played all of them now, well, everything that he had at the show, I can tell you that the quality and the feel and the tone of the stuff that he's making is world class, right up there with anything that you care to put against it. So check Charles out, and I'm really thankful for him giving me the opportunity to kind of host Headfirst within the stand that he had, and we had a ball on the weekend. It was really cool. So it was great for me in terms of kind of exposing the Alta to customers, right, or hopefully they'll become customers, right? A range of guys that wanted to play through the amp, and getting to meet a bunch of those people was awesome. But the industry contacts for me kind of breaking into, into the industry with now, a production amp out there that we are, making and trying to get out into the US and to the Australian marketplace. These industry contacts are just so important for me. And I also want to thank, I could just see Warwick. Hey man, I got to give a shout out to Woz, because it was Warwick that connected me with Charles, right? I remember speaking to Charles. This is just if I could tell you a little story for a second. Sorry, I remember speaking to Woz. So Warwick I've known for a long time, and Woz is a kind of a premier live sound guy in Australia, and also a fantastic amp tech. And kind of we connected with, a mutual love for Marshall circuits and the old stuff. And I remember when I got my 69 50 watt Plexi, which you can just kind of see right there, right? It's a Plexi panel just before they transitioned to the metal panels. Warwick called me, and he was so excited. It was like, how you get it if you've ever had kids, right? And you get a call from your best mate or whatever, and when you've just had, maybe you just released the news that you've had a brand new baby boy or baby girl. It was like that. It was like, man, you've got a Plexi. It was awesome. So it was Warwick that I actually spoke to Woz, and I said, I probably should try and get a stand at this guitar show. It was about 6 months ago when I knew that it was coming up, and it was Warwick that convinced me to not do that. He said, the best thing you can do, Jason, is try and get your amp on someone's established stand, particularly someone who's, the level of what they are producing is right up there in world class, which is definitely Charles. So it was Warwick that introduced me to Charles, and set that up. So man, shout out for Woz. If you're in Australia and you need your amp looked at, and I won't, because I'm pretty short on time at the moment. I am taking some stuff in still, but I'm pretty selective, right? Do reach out to Woz as well. His knowledge of vintage Marshall stuff is right up there. I'll just go through a few of these comments, right, and then we'll kind of get into talking about this loop. Hey Paul, hope you're doing well, man. Alex, hey dude, aren't you meant to be at work or something? Seattle, awesome, cool, fantastic. JCM 900, oh god, okay. 1x12 combo is a good way to make a split power circuit. So the best power circuit you can do is I just got a text message here, guys, just 2 secs. Sorry, take care of that. It was my wife, so I have to make time for the boss. If you've got a 100 watt amp, right, or anything with four power tubes, and the best thing you can do to make it like at a half power mode is to disable 2 tubes. All right, so you can do that simply by pulling 2 tubes out. That's the easiest thing to do, right? So you got your 4. Let's say you got a 4x EL34 amp. You pull the 2 outside tubes, leave the 2 inside ones there. You've now got a 50 watt amp, and the only other thing you need to do is you need to set the impedance selector differently. So if you're running into a 16 ohm cab, you set your impedance selector on the amp to 8, back one, right? So 16 ohm cab, put your impedance selector on 8. You've now got yourself a 50 watt amp, right? You can actually put that on a switch, right? So the way to do that, if you wanted to kind of mod it, and you were, game enough to, get yourself a double pole, double throw switch, and what you're going to do with those 2 outside tubes is you're going to lift the cathodes. So if you have a look at the wiring of an EL34, you'll see that pins 1 and 8 are tied together, and then they go to ground. You have a look at your Marshalls, right? They'll be wired, the pins 1 and 8 will be wired together, and they'll go straight to a ground lug, right? And the ground lug is connected to the chassis, and that's right next to the power tubes. If you interrupt that via a switch, you can then have a switch that kind of lifts the ground or disconnects the ground from those power tubes, and then you got yourself a 50-watt switch. And those two power tubes, basically by flicking the switch so that the grounds are lifted, it's the same effect as pulling the tubes out. And what you need to remember, of course, is that you still, once you flick that switch, you still want to change the impedance. Yeah, Plexi reveal parties, that's awesome. Too funny, man. Too funny. Yeah, totally, John. Yeah, it was. Nice one, man. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, Alex, man, I'm not familiar with that. Maybe post, Alex, if you're so inclined. And man, I'd be keen to see it too. If you've got some information on that, particularly, post it in the DIY group, and we can have a look at it, right? Anyone here in the chat can kind of jump into that group and have a look, right? I do have a small super chat here. Hey, Fuzz. Justice. Yeah, cool, man. That's the whole idea with this, right? The reason that I decided to start sharing some of these mods was to try and build, try and create some information for the hobbyist builder and maybe get some people into the hobby, because, modelers have their place, right? But we don't want tube amps to die out. So the more people that are into them, and the more people that can work on them too, the longer they will live on. Because what I found, certainly in Australia, is that the number of techs that are around that can work on these old circuits, it's just, they're dying off. It's smaller and smaller, right? So it's good for us who are doing it, but there's not enough techs to go around, and I would guess it's probably the same in the US and other markets as well. Yeah, William, no, I haven't yet, man. Someone was threatening to bring in a JVM 410 the other day, and I politely declined. Not because they really wanted mods, but because there was some issues with it. And I am keen when time permits. Right? I've got a kind of bunch of things I need to get done in terms of some core. Well, I've got a bunch of Marshalls in here at the moment that I'm modding for people that I know well, and these are industry people, so it's an important thing for me to do in terms of making good on my commitment to them. But also it's good for the Headfirst brand to have music industry people using the amps that I've worked on, right? So that's, I'm committed to doing that. And I've just got so much on my plate at the moment in terms of getting these alters going, both here and in the US. So one day though, yeah, I do want to kind of have a look at the JVM and see what I might be able to do. But in the meantime, I'm interested in feedback on what people would like to change. So people say, "Oh, can you got any JVM mods?" And it's like, well, yeah, anything can be modded to a degree. So the question is, what don't you like about it? What would you like to change? That would be, and if we can start there, then I can kind of start thinking about things that are possible even before one comes in for me to look at. Yeah, man, just keep learning, keep tinkering, right? It's good to get answers handed to you, and that can be a real help. But there's nothing like solving a problem for yourself. And if you persevere for long enough, you will, right? So every single problem that you could come across, like every hum and buzz, and signal's not going through all the way through the amp, trace it through. If you persevere with this stuff, you will You will actually get there. Yes, plate-driven tone stack. So the Wizards are all plate-driven, like the Jubilee, Marshall Jubilee, and they're pretty cool. They're a different kind of vibe, right? They can be really quite responsive. So if the plate-driven tone stack is after a reasonable number of gain stages, not too early in the circuit, then they are super responsive to dialing in the pots, right? You'll get a lot of variation in that. They sound cool. I think they have a particular sound, and they are quite suited to certain high gain circuits, I think. But they don't sound like vintage Marshall. So my vibe, I guess, and the thing that the sound that I have in my head is that modded Marshall kind of thing. Probably no surprise. And I think a traditional cathode follower driven tone stack is part of that. It's part of that thing, right? 9-volt DC in an amp. Anthony, it depends on what you can tap off. So you can do a couple of things. You can get, you can buy little tiny transformers, right? So, that'll do 120 volts or 240 volts, depending on where you are in the world, down to, say 12 volts AC. And they're quite small, right? They're the size of, I don't know, bigger than that, 3 times the size of that in terms of, width, but they're pretty small, not like a normal power transformer that you've got on your amp, right, which is obviously large. Small enough that they will fit in the inside wall of most amps inside the chassis. And that'll give you a low voltage rectified AC, right? So you have it switched on your power switch, right? When your power's off, obviously you don't want that transformer energized. So once you've got that, you can use a simple board. You could use my DC heater board definitely as a to hold the rectifier diodes and smoothing cap and all that kind of stuff. But if you've got, you might have a power transformer that's already got a low voltage wind on it. That's another way to do it. So if you've got a power transformer that's got a 5-volt wind, which is used for rectifier tubes, and often you'll find that you'll have your power transformer might have a 5-volt wind that's unused. You can use a voltage doubler arrangement to rectify that and get up to 9 volts DC. I'm assuming if you want 9 volts DC, it maybe is because you want to kind of have something to have a DC jack on the back of your amp so you can power pedals and that kind of stuff. Certainly one way to do it. The other way, the final way, is that if your amp's already got a 12 volt supply, which is pretty common, depending on the vintage, certainly common in more modern amps, you could tap off that, use a simple voltage divider or a regulator to drop your 12 volts down to 9. So there's a few ideas there. Yeah. Rip out the guts of it and throw a Kelly board in. That'll work for sure. Yeah. How high did you drop it from, John? Was it just a gentle place it in the trash can, or did you throw it in? That'd be the way. Yeah, the Wizards, man, they are pretty stiff. They're pretty bright too. They're a pretty bright amp. And Rick does have the bright pot, which is basically a kind of low pass filter kind of thing where you can, the lead and rhythm channels normally have their own pot where you can dial the brightness down to some degree, but they do come to life when you crank them. Like I guess any power section, once you actually get it really loud, you'll naturally start to get a bit more sag in it. Yeah, turret boards, hand-wired turret, that's cool. You can definitely, a turret-based amp is a really good amp to learn on. Modding PCBs is okay kind of for a one-way mod. In other words, you kind of do it and then leave it, maybe tinker a little bit. But if you want to kind of work, eventually you'll start to destroy that PCB. So a turret board amp is awesome to have as a kind of a test amp, test case, right? Always have one. If you're kind of getting serious about this stuff, it's always good to have one that's ready to be rebuilt and modded and changed and all that kind of stuff. If at high volume, a 50 watt 69 plexi clone has the guitar output coming from the head. Not sure what that means, Vince. Maybe just if you could give me a bit more information, man, I'll get to that. If at high volume, the amp has the guitar output coming from the head, yeah. Maybe give me more info and I'll do my best, man. Yeah, definitely right. In Oz, so JCar is a local electronics retailer, right? They're in all the capital cities and all the states, even in country towns all around the place. Pretty good resource for all kinds of bits and pieces if you're short. But they do have a good selection of these small transformers. Hammond make them as well. I'm pretty sure I did that Build Basics. I think 3 Build Basics series on the channels, and one of them was on power transformers. And I did actually, my memory is that I showed a couple of different Hammond models that could be used, probably for DC heaters, so they would have been transformers that could handle much higher current. The key thing is that, if you basically choose your transformer based on the current requirements that you need. So if you need something that can push out up to 500 milliamps, then maybe get 1 amp power transformer that can spit out a 12 volt 1 amp secondary. If you just need something to power relays and LEDs, then you can use like 200 milliamps. If you need something for DC heaters, then you need probably 2 amps, right? Something like that. Yeah, man. Hit that like. What else we got going here guys? I'll just scroll through the chat here. Got some comments here about, I think you guys are talking about the impedance selector, probably to do with the half power thing, perhaps. Yeah. The LND 150, the great LND 150 shortage of 2023. Last year it was tubes, this year it's the bloody LNDs. You can't find them anywhere in the normal suppliers. Mauser, DigiKey, whatever, they're all gone. But you can try your luck on eBay or AliExpress. Now, some people say, AliExpress, they're probably clones or they're not legit or whatever. Probably okay, and probably all made in China anyway, right? And probably all made in the same factory anyway. Maybe some of them are official and some of them aren't. But they probably came through the exact same manufacturing factory. I have ordered some from AliExpress, and they are fine. They do the job. They haven't failed. Fine, right? So that would be my only tip at the moment until the normal wholesalers or distributors get them back in stock. No sweat, man. Happy to help. Alright, here we go. And this is the plugged into a reactive load, and when I go past, say, 3 o'clock, you can hear the output of the amplifier. Yeah, so, well, 2 things there. You can definitely hear if you've got your amp cranked, the output transformer itself, you can hear it mechanically. Right? You can actually hear your guitar or the output of the amp, because that output transformer, there's so much energy being transferred there. The laminations and so on kind of vibrate and carry on, and you can hear it, right? There's no doubt about that. I don't think that's what you mean, though. You're probably saying you can hear it. Actually, maybe that is what you mean, because in any other scenario, you're going to be hearing the full output of the amp, like actually coming through. So it's probably what it is, man. Either that, or you've got some magnetic coupling that's going into something else. So if your output transformer is really close to like speaker, right, which is also magnetic, you can definitely get some magnetic coupling from that output transformer into the magnet of the voice coil of the speaker, and then you can get some weird noises coming through that way. So just check your proximity to anything like that, yeah, that might be that. Yeah, really cool. This guitar, I mean, I'm a Serb fan. I do love everything that John does. I've been super impressed with, and have following his products for a long time. And obviously, I dig Pete. Pete's awesome, right? And super generous with his knowledge, which is fantastic. And this guitar, I mean, I don't have a small collection, but I don't have a massive collection, right? I meet people, tell me they've got 60, 80, whatever guitars. I've got about 20, which is certainly enough. This guitar, every time I pick it up, I just go, wow. It's like a kind of really well put together machine. It's like, when you get behind the wheel of a really nice car or something, maybe your mate owns one or whatever, and you just everything just feels really beautifully engineered and so on. That's what this guitar feels like to me. It's never been set. This is like the factory setup. Literally haven't changed a thing. And yeah, it's just awesome. All the frets are beautiful. And it kind of has a really, what I'd call a balanced sound. It's not like, it just kind of right across the spectrum of low frequencies to high frequencies. It doesn't have any kind of nasty peaks in it. I don't find myself kind of, reaching for the tone control or having to re-EQ an amp every time I plug it in. It just works. Yeah, normal thing, man. If your amp is cranked, it's totally normal. And like when I have an amp on the bench and I run a test signal into it, right, normally kind of 1 kilohertz sine wave, and I'm running it into a dummy load, right, just a big resistor, massive 300 watt resistor. Yeah, 300 watts, I think. Yeah, 300 watt resistor, yeah. So there's no speaker, but I'm putting a test signal in it, and then I crank the volume. I can hear it. I can hear that woo, and it's coming straight from the output transformer. Yeah. I promised to do a deep dive on the altar, didn't I? On a live stream. I will do that. Maybe open up on the bench, right? And I'll talk a little bit about the construction method and all the rest of it. Look, it's got Marshall DNA. I mean, most amps do, and for the vibe of things that we probably all like. So yeah, it's if you keep peeling the onion all the way back and you kind of look at some of the core architecture, it's got some 2203 kind of vibe going on in it, right, in terms of the way the gain stages cascade. 2203 JC, like late era JMP, early era JCM 800, but it's not identical, obviously. But yeah, that's kind of like, you know, yeah. And as I said, you know, all that kind of high gain or, you know, kind of modded gain stuff that certainly that I like, and I'm sure most of the people on the stream at the moment probably like, because they might not be interested in what I'm doing if they didn't. It's all Marshall based, all of it. Yeah, hey Rob, how you doing, man? Yeah, they do, man. I like, just, yeah, mad respect for that company, right? I just love the way that they're just independent. He's just kind of, you know, John and the team have just done it, built it from scratch and kept it as a family business. Just done it the hard way, but massively successful. Richard, how you doing, man? I think so, Scott. I'm not aware of any real downside of that. The only thing that, you know, you need to be kind of, let's just say, aware of, you're pulling more heater current. Like, you've added a tube to an existing amp, another 12AX7. It's not a big deal, right? What is it? Another 300 milliamps or something. And there's plenty of kind of Marshall circuits, right, where modders have come along and drilled another hole and stuck another preamp tube. By and large, all the power transformers are rated with their heater lines are rated well above the requirements of the amp. So I wouldn't stress about it. I think perfectly safe. Yeah, Jason, no worries, man. No worries. No, we're going to get to this. I started looking at the comments and I've been going for bloody ages looking at this stuff. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that now, man. I think we're nearly through this batch of comments, right? Yeah, cool. Don't forget to watch Dave when Dave came onto my channel. We did 3 hours, I think. Make sure you check that out. I enjoyed that because we got really techie. You have to give me more context. Sorry, Vince, man. I'm not sure. Oh, okay, that, right. I've definitely heard of that. Channel or whatever you want to call it. Okay. Alex has quite rightly created a nice segue into the loop setup. So I thought I've done this a couple of times before. Let me just share. I'm going to share screens here, right? Because I'm going to show you the three basic methods of wiring in one of these LND effects loop. And once we kind of see that, it might be more helpful when we actually look at the amp. So again, I drew some stuff on my iPad last night, and I've got 3 really basic kind of block diagram style schematic things here that show how the basic 3 methods that you can have for setting up an effects loop like this. And number 1 is the most kind of basic method, and this is what you would see in a JCM 800 style master volume circuit, you know, 2203, 2204 kind of thing, where you have straight off the treble wiper, right, which is the middle lug of the treble pot. You'll come straight into the input of the effects loop, and that's got its own send and return, and then you come out of the effects loop into a return volume or master volume, right? So in a 2204 JCM 800, this would be your master volume, right? the master volume on the the second pot, preamp gain, and then master volume. This is this guy here. Sometimes in amps you see this on the rear of the amp next to the effects loop, in the Kelly. That's kind of how I'll have this return volume here, and then from there you go straight out to the phase inverter. Okay, that's method one. Method two is where you have, you can see my mouse here now, right? Where you have a multi-channel amp, you'll have channel volumes that are before the effects loop. Things get a bit more interesting here, because when you're coming off when your input to the effects loop's off a treble wiper like this is a setup normally for a single channel amp, or an amp that has a shared EQ, where you might have two channels and then they go into a shared EQ, then you come off a treble wiper like this. But where you've got a two-channel amp that has independent tone stacks or EQs, you'll often come in, you'll have a channel volume is the kind of the last part of that part of the preamp circuit, and then a relay that's switching between the channels and a single input into the effects loop, and here's our send return. And then out of the effects loop you have another pot, which is your overall system master. So when you see amps, right, that have channel volumes, and then you have an overall system master, or as sometimes called a return level, this is how it's set up, right? The channel volumes are pre-loop and the system master is post-loop. And the important thing to know here is that the volumes are setting the send level to your loop. Right? And it's pretty obvious when you look at it like this, isn't it? But this pot here is setting the amplitude of the signal that's going to come into the effects loop. So it's a send level. And so you can actually, look at your pedal. If your pedal's like in my H9, where it shows if the pedal's clipping or not, or you use the H9 app and you can actually see the level. It's got like an LED, like a VU indicator. You can use the channel volume to set the send level for the pedal, so it's as loud as it can be without it clipping, and then you've got an overall system master here. And finally, and you see this a lot in Jose Master style amps, which is what this amp is, where you have a Jose Master with diodes, right, which is what this kind of metal mod is, which is pre-tone stack, and then into the tone stack, and then out of the tone stack you're coming off the treble wiper like you do in scenario 1, and then into the effects loop, and then out of the effects loop straight into the phase inverter. Now this is kind of a tidy way to do it, in terms of you don't have to, if you're modding an amp, you don't have to drill in yet another hole and put yet another pot in here for a return volume, but you do need to be very careful about how you're setting up the input load and the output load of the effects loop. Otherwise you're at risk of introducing a lot of noise into the circuit. And so this number 3 here is really what I'm going to talk about in terms of how to wire the effects loop in here with this particular Origin mod. But just in terms of kind of a reference point of the 3 different methods, I thought I'd just kind of throw those up there, and it might be useful. So what we're going to look at now is the actual amp, and I'm just going to want to, per the last live stream, right, where the requests were like, show us how the effects loop is wired in. We'll do that now. And I'm just going to put this guitar on a stand for a second so I can kind of lean over, and we're going to use the chopstick here to kind of go through this. So you can see this is this is the standard effects loop jacks, so I'm going to show you kind of how you can, this is the effects loop board here, I'm going to show you kind of how this is wired in, where you reuse the jacks that are already on the origin, right? It saves you having to kind of drill and trying to, you know, use the jacks that would otherwise be on the effects loop board, because you can see these boards here, right? Just like the Metro loop, you would normally have your, you know, your 1/4" jacks soldered straight into the board, and then you mount them into holes in the chassis. Well, you don't want to do that in the origin, because you can, otherwise you'll be drilling holes. And you can see I've just simple send and return here is going into my H9 here, which is what we were listening to at the first part of this stream. Now, if I kind of just zoom in here, let's talk about how this board is mounted and how it's connected to the send and return jacks, and then we'll go out and have a look at kind of how it's actually wired in from a power supply perspective, and also how it's wired in terms of input signal and output signal. And it's, as I said, it's kind of wired like that scenario 3 that we were just looking at. Okay, so mounting this guy, this standoff here. If you have a look at the one of the origin clips that I did on YouTube, where I think I did a standalone clip on how to install an effects loop into an Origin 20, you can see how the standoff is actually mounted on this board underneath here, underlying board. So you just take my word for it that there's kind of a standoff sitting in here that's that the board is now mounted on. So you do need to drill a hole through the PCB here for this guy to mount on, right? I've got a star washer in under here, so this thing is as tight as. It's not moving anywhere. It's only on one standoff, but it's super tight. There's no way it's going to move. And with the Origin 20, these caps here are lower value. These electrolytic filter caps here are smaller value caps, and they're shorter. And it's easy for this, the effects loop board here can actually sit over the top of them. So normally when I do an Origin 20 and put the effects loop in, I actually drill the hole right up here, and the PCB sits back a bit further this way. But with the 50, these guys are much higher, and so you kind of need to drill this hole closer up. So that's just, you'll figure it out when you try and put it in there, right? But it won't sit. These things, these electrolytic caps here are too tall. Now, send and return. So what you do to reuse the send and return jacks on the Origin that are already here, these actually connect to a header. When I say header, I mean something that looks a bit like this, right? And you have shielded. They have shielded coax. It's a 4-pin header, and there's 2 lots of shielded coax on it. All right, so 4 pins, 2 signal lines, and 2 ground lines. And so you leave these shielded coax here. You leave one side of them connected to the header. Don't cut them off, and they'll sit on that pin header, and then you basically cut this off. You cut these off, right, so you can actually solder them into here. So normally the send and return, these wires here connect to a header on the main board, on the main PCB board. I think it's this one here. All right, it's this one here. But as we've repurposed V2 for the core circuit, of course, we need to actually use this board here. So you can solder these in. This is the send one, that's the ground, and this is the signal line, and return same. Now, the most common mistake that people make is they get the send and return around the wrong way. So you can do it by trial and error, right? If you do this thing and it doesn't work, literally swap these around, reverse them, and then try your luck. But the best way to do it, of course, plug a guitar cable into the return, right, and use your meter to check the tip of the cable to the signal wire on each of these, and you'll find that you'll get continuity to one of them, and then you'll know that that's the return. Don't do it on the send, because these are bridged together. These signals are bridged together until you plug a 1/4 inch jack into the return. Okay, so that's how you do that. Now let's talk about powering this guy. Okay, so I've got a 47k dropper here in R8, and the voltages is because the voltages in the Origin 50 are pretty high. I talked about this, I think, in the last live stream when I went into the core mod, and in the mod I put these 10k resistors in here. In the standard Origin, these are 4k7 here, and 4k7 here. So these are 10k and 10k. Still, the voltages here are pretty high, and so I've actually, this red wire here is tapped onto this side of that 10k. Just zoom out a bit so you can kind of get your bearings here. It's tapped onto this side of that 10k resistor, and it comes into the B plus input on the PCB, and then I've got a 47k dropper on R8, and when you measure your voltage on this side, you're aiming for 300. It's pretty close to 300. Okay, you can go higher than 300, you know, 320 odd, even 330, but 300's kind of, you know, pretty safe here, right? Now you also need to ground it. There's a bunch of ground pads on here. You can choose a convenient one, and my black wire here, this black wire here, is the ground. Don't forget, if you're building one of these yourself, you've got to bend this. Don't cut this electrolytic cap here. Don't mount it vertically and clip the leads off, because it does need to be bent over. It's too high. It'll sit above the chassis and you won't be able to put the amp back in the head shell. Just a trap for young players. So let me zoom out and I'll show you where I'm getting my ground reference from. Right here. Alright. Which is, and let me check, I'll tell you what the component number is. It's R57. Alright, so at the bottom of R57 is a ground, which is perfectly fine to use, right? Because I find, in terms of preventing ground loops and so on, you know, when you start using effects loops and you start using outboard gear, and particularly if that outboard gear has its own ground reference, like if you're using an FM3, one of the Axe Effects style products, fractal products I should say, in an effects loop, you can get ground loops really easily, because those things have their own ground reference. They have their own IEC ground connector. Something like this is safe, right? Because it's using an isolated DC ground. So the only ground reference that this guy's getting is actually coming from the amp itself. So very, very rare to get ground loop there. But if you're using something that's grounded, as I said, you can get ground loops. And I found through trial and error that setting the ground of the effects loop to somewhere in the preamp is pretty safe. If you set it to somewhere in the power amp, like or the speaker ground or whatever, chances are you'll get more ground loop problems. So yeah, bottom of 57 is where we're getting the ground there. Now let's talk about, I think finally, let's talk about how this sucker is actually wired in from the perspective of your guitar signal. And if you go back to well, you don't have to, right? But the last live stream that we did, when I talked about the this mod, the Origin 50 mod, as I said, there was no effects loop in there, right? So what we had going on was that the treble wiper is this connection here on this header here, right? This wire here. And so to complete that mod, all I had to do was run it from here over to the input. Over to this header here. This one. Right, that's the input to the phase inverter right there. Okay, so with no effects loop, you can basically run straight from here over to here, simple as. And if you look at that live stream, you'll see that's what I'm doing. I've got one of these, reused one of the origin standard wires and just ran from there to there. Now, per the kind of block schematics that I showed before, we need to insert this effects loop between the treble wiper and the phase inverter. It's got to sit in the middle. So you need to have your signal wire, which is where your guitar signal's going. It needs to come from here and go into the input of the loop. And on these effects loop boards, you'll see they're labeled in and out, right? So it's pretty simple. Into the input here, and then from the output we come into the middle part of this header. Okay, in the middle part of the header, you can see, I'm just zoom that in a little bit, this is actually a 6-pin header, and the first two here we're not using anymore. And then in the middle here is the phase inverter input. This one on the right here is for the presence pot. Okay, so this is the phase inverter input here, and it's coming straight from the output of that loop. So the loop is in the circuit the whole time, all right, which is fine. These things are so transparent, and in fact, I think in a pre-tone stack master Jose, it's pretty cool to have this loop in the whole time, and kind of like adds a nice bit of, I don't know, nice bit of zing to it, and I think it just helps to buffer the signal before it hits the phase inverter. So probably the last thing to talk about in this setup is how to set up the input and output loads. I mentioned that earlier, right? So in reference to the three setups that I talked about, you'll have different signal levels coming into the loop. So when you're coming straight off the treble wiper, where there is no channel volume, right? Where there is no channel volume before the tone stack, before it hits that loop, the signal's really hot. So for anyone who's actually grab one of these boards from me, you can go and have a look at the schematic, right, in the Google Drive, and you'll see R2. And the R2 resistor is like the input impedance load, and it's 2 meg 2. It's always 2 meg 2. All right, and schematic shows 2 meg 2. So in scenario 1, where you're coming off the treble wiper and there's no channel volume pre-loop, you've got a super hot signal, and 2 meg 2 kind of brings it down to the level that the input of the loop can handle it, basically. Now in scenario 2 and 3, and this is scenario 3, right, this amp, scenario 2 and 3, where you've got a channel volume pre-loop, use 470k, right? 1 meg's okay as well, but you'll find that 2 meg 2 is probably loading that signal down too much, and you can't get enough signal out your send jack, because you adjust the trim pot, right? You want unity gain. When the loop is disconnected or the loop's in, you adjust that trim pot so you get unity gain. So rule of thumb, right? No channel volume pre-loop, use 2 meg 2. When there's channel volume pre-loop, use 470k, right? And that's what this loop has in it, 475k, 470, same. Now on the output, so I don't know if I can actually show that, but in this loop layout, R2 sits right in the middle of these two caps here. So I don't know if that's coming out on the video, right, but you can see there's a yellow band on that resistor, and a yellow purple. It's 470k, all right. And then let's talk about the output. All right, so when you come out of the loop, if you've got a return volume, you use a 250k pot on there. Normally, it's fine, perfectly fine, right? Don't use 1 meg; it's too high. Use a 250k, and it's obviously paralleled. If you look at the schematic for the LND loop, that I've got, right, in the Google Drive, you'll see R9, and R9 is the very last kind of resistor in the circuit, and it's a 1 meg to ground. So when you got that 250k pot sitting on the output of the LND loop, you've actually got 250 in parallel with 1 meg. So it's less than 250k load actually. And you can adjust that 1 meg resistor down. You can make it lower, right, if you're kind of wanting to reduce that load. And the reason you do that is if you want to have a hotter send signal. So you've got to have these things in balance. I don't know if this will make sense, right? But if you want unity gain, it means that the combination of the send level and the return level need to be in balance, so that when the loop is out of circuit, it's still the same volume. If your send level is hot and your return level is hot, it's going to be louder, right? You know, and even though this loop is switched in permanently, you don't actually want it to be louder, because otherwise you'd just be smashing your phase inverter unnecessarily. You want this thing to be unity gain. So what you want to do is you want to adjust that the return load so that you can get a nice hot signal coming out of the send level, and the return level is kind of low enough to compensate. So you get more send, less return, and you'll still get unity gain. And the thing with these LND 150s, right, is that if you don't control the return level in the loop, the thing is just super hot, and you'll pick up noise and all kinds of things, right? And your effects loop will be difficult to use, because it'll just be too noisy. So in scenario 3, right, back to the 3 layouts, scenario 3 where we don't have a post loop master, I'll give you a tip here, right? What you want to do is you actually want to have the load that's on the output of the loop really low, right? Really low. So what I've actually done in this setup, and it works really well, I was testing it yesterday and I was like really happy with it. Let me see if I can see it here. Oh, you can't, right? R9 on the loop is right behind this black capacitor here, sitting right here. You can't see it, but it's a 68k, right? 68k. So you can imagine, you look at that schematic, right? We're coming on the return stage of the LND. We go into the output. We're about to send the thing into the phase inverter. And what I've got, rather than the 1 meg to ground on R9, I've got a 68k to ground. What that's doing is attenuating the level of that return signal. And in an amp where I've got a pre-loop master volume, which is a Jose master, is obviously pre-loop, right, in the setup, having a nice, kind of attenuated return stage means that I can get a much hotter signal going out that send stage, and then the loop is much more usable. Even at lower volume settings, the loop is fine and it's not noisy. All right, so that's the kind of main tip there. All right. I'll just go back and what I might do now, guys, is I'm kind of through the guts of the information, not the lesson. It's not a lesson. The information that I wanted to give you on the stream, right, about kind of wiring up one of these effects loops. And hopefully this information is useful if you grab one of these boards and you're going to stick it in, a 2204 that you've got, clone or whatever, or you're going to retrofit this loop into any other kind of Marshall style circuit or even a Fender style circuit. Hopefully some of this information will be useful, but in terms of the kind of Origin 50 setup particularly, I think I've covered the basics, and obviously this stream will be up on the channel, so as a future reference point for folks that are contemplating or are tackling the Origin mod, then hopefully this is useful. So yeah. Someone called me Yoda yesterday, and I said, on a chat, and I said, well, I feel as old as Yoda after last weekend anyway. Yeah, look, I know I blabbed on about this stuff, and as I always say on these streams, God, I hope it's useful. Looks like people have kind of stayed online, so it must be interesting to you guys. It's interesting to me anyway. So what I'm going to do, we're at the hour mark, right? And I'm, as I said, I think in terms of kind of packaging up some information and delivering it, we've probably tested everyone's patience with enough information on that. So I'm going to turn this mic off and just go through some tones on this amp to finish up, right? So I'll just kind of play for a couple of minutes, and then I'll sign off, and I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their day. And obviously for those in the Northern Hemisphere, that's your day's probably nearly finished. You're probably about to go to bed. And for those of us down under, you know, I hope the rest of your afternoon is going well. Hey Scott, it's good to see you here, man. It's really nice to see familiar names turn up on the stream. It's really cool. So yeah, I'll see you next time, guys. I'm not too sure what the next stream will be. It's only 8 o'clock. Oh, man, I don't know. It depends on where you are, I guess, man. I've got an SV20. Actually, I'll just talk about that for a second before I get into the final play out. Ed, who is works for Roland / Boss here in Australia. He has yeah, hey Rob, nice one, man. Ed sent me a brand new in box. It hasn't even been opened yet. SV20 head, you know, the Marshall Studio vintage, and the brief is to turn it into the, you know, the all the Roland Boss guys are sending me their amps at the moment because I did a mod for one of them. I did a mod for Josh last year, towards the end of last year. You'll see it on my channel. It's called EVH Tones from a 1987X or something like that. I think November, December last year. And they basically all want the same kind of mod. So I'm finishing another 1987X as we speak. It'll be done within the next couple of days. And then I'm going to get into this SV20. So I might do a video on that rather than a live stream, because I've been asked so many times for mods on an SV20, and it's going to be a bit of a learning curve for me. I know what mod I want to do, but the learning curve is figuring out how to implement it in a PCB based amp, because that's the hardest thing, I think, you know. Like this, the work on the origin, right? Getting all this bloody origin thing going. The circuit's easy because I already know what I want to do. The hard part is figuring the optimal way of shoehorning it into an existing printed circuit board without having to kind of cut too many tracks and have too many kind of components floating all around the place. So the SV20, if that's of interest, let me know. But I'm kind of thinking about investing some time in and into a proper video on that one, and in the usual way probably share how I did it. Anyway, guys, I'll sign off now. I'll turn this microphone off, and I'll just kind of play a bit on the amp, and I'll catch you next time.